Well, thank you for the introduction, Sarah. So today's webinar is Making Manna, a story about the failings of the justice system and a victim's efforts to heal. So we'll be having a discussion about a new book, just came out 2 years ago by Eric Lotke, who I'm pleased to have as our special guest today and who I'll be introducing. So let me tell you about our special guest, Eric Lotke. I first met Eric through the Restorative Justice Fellowships Network. He has been a lawyer and a policy advocate for many years, and his legal advocacy includes groundbreaking litigation against private prison companies and the high cost of prison phone calls. He's worked with a number of different policy advocacy organizations, including the Justice Policy Institute. He's also worked with managing various treatment programs, including programs for victims and perpetrators of sexual violence, as well as other crimes and harms. He's worked to reduce violence in DC public schools, organize labor unions around fast food strikes, and stop the privatization of public goods. He's had a very interesting career moving from policy advocacy to economic justice work and currently organized labor. As I mentioned, I met Eric Lotke through the Restorative Justice Fellowships Network. He's a recipient of a Restorative Justice Fellowship, and much of that research focused around the cost of locking, the exploitative cost of phone calls from prison and other work related to that. And his books include The Real War on Crime, 2044, excuse me, there's a tongue twister. 2044, The Problem Isn't Big Brother, It's Big Brother Incorporated, and more recently, the book we are talking about on today's webinar, Making Manna. Welcome, Eric. It is so wonderful to have you on today's webinar.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
It's really great to finally have you. We've been talking about this for some time. So Eric, when we first met, you were working in policy and legal advocacy, and at that time, I believe you were working with the Justice Policy Institute, doing some really groundbreaking research. And now you have this fiction piece, Making Manna. So can you tell us not only about the book, but what inspired you to write it, and how you got from the work that you were doing when we first met to this work that you're doing now with this novel?
Well, I always did a whole bunch of different things. I did direct services, legal services in particular, for people who are in the justice system. I did policy work and policy research, and really trying to, on the one hand, you're helping somebody who's, let's say, locked up or their son is not getting parole, and then at the same time, you're trying to make it so that there's more drug treatment available and more rational parole decisions. So that's the policy and the direct service, and there's so much story going on. There's so much that's happening in the world. And it occurred to me somewhere in there, actually my last book, 2044, it occurred to me, hey, this could be a novel. And I had a story idea, and I wrote it as a story, and it went pretty well. And so then I went ahead and did it again. And the basic idea was storytelling is just part of world changing. There's stories behind everything. And so here's a problem, and how can we solve it? And let's not write a policy brief. So that's the inspiration for. Well, actually, I should say it differently. Reading is fun. Reading novels is fun. I want you to have a good time. Here's a novel. Read it. Share it with your book group. Have a good time. And so in my perfect world, you both read the book, have a good time, enjoy it, and then you lie in bed at night saying, why is her mom locked up? And how did that happen? And for how many years? And so you can do the critical commentary behind the scenes or at the book group or whatever it is, if you want to. But when you're reading it, I just want you to have a good time. It's a story.
Sure.
I don't know if you call it motivation.
Yes. No, go ahead.
So there was one particular place where it came from, sort of the aha moment or the inspiration, or where does it begin? And I was working a long time ago, call it 20 years ago, 15, something like that, on a death penalty case. And It wasn't really my case. There was some attorney friends were working on it, and they said, "Hey, Eric, you're a good writer, good lawyer. Could you read the briefs for us? Give us a quick edit." And I said, "Sure, happy to give you a quick edit." And so this was defendant's side sentencing phase. So he's already been convicted, and basically they're trying to save his life. It comes down to, in the death penalty context, it's either life without parole or it's the death penalty. So they're trying to make it so that he doesn't die. And this is the social history part of the brief, really, where it's the where you want to elicit sympathy for the person. And I read their briefs, and they're excellent briefs in very good shape, not surprising to me. Comma here, comma there, here's a little adjustment. But basically they were in good shape. But there was this one line that was buried in the middle of the briefs. And it was, and if the journalist term buried your lead. It's like you buried your lead. That line buried in the middle of the brief, my main edit was I circled it and put it all the way at the top of the brief. That's your opening line. This person, the young man who we're now meeting on death row, call him Jimmy Jones. Jimmy Jones was the product of an incestuous rape. And that's the line that was buried. Jimmy Jones was the product of an incestuous rape. And I said, you know what? It doesn't get any worse than that. That's your opening line. Everything else about this poor kid's life, it all follows from the beginning like that. So the case came and the case went. And for whatever reason, that line stuck in my mind. Product of an incestuous rape. Yuck. And my last novel, it's tragic. We can talk about that if you want, but it's tragic. It has an unhappy ending. Things go downhill. And it's a book that should leave, if I succeed, it leaves you sad. It's a tragic book. But I'm not a tragic guy. And so after that book went away, I was kind of like, I want to write something. I got a bad taste in my mouth. I want to write something with a happy ending. I want to write something uplifting, triumph over adversity, have a good time with it. And so in order to have a happy ending, you need a bad beginning. And what's the worst beginning that I can possibly imagine? And my mind is flashing back to that death penalty case from whatever number of years before, product of an incestuous rape. That's the worst beginning that I can possibly dream of. And so my mission in life was, I want to take that kid and his mom, don't forget the mom, I want to take that circumstance and give it a happy end. That was my mission. Product of incestuous rape with a happy end. And so that was that. So that was so that's what ultimately became Making Manna. And so it starts, but then there's this world about, and so it's the victim, right? So she's a victim of a terrifying crime. It's intra-family sexual abuse. It's like the worst crime that I can really think of. And then she runs away from home, and then all of the questions arise. What does this? It's victim-centered, but it's storytelling. What does this person need? If she's going to get better, how does it happen? What does it look like? Who does what, and what can she do, and what do other people do? What can other people do for her? And so it's not technically restorative justice in the sense of having programs, but it's about the human interest, the character-driven interest of somebody wants to get better, somebody needs to get better. How does it happen? What does the justice system do? Does the justice system help? And so that's the background, if you will. And then as she's going through her life, she's in low-income, dead-end America. And so what does she see? She sees heroin addicts who are in trouble, and nobody wants to help them. And she sees police arresting the wrong people, and she knows who's the right people and who are the right people, but the police don't, and they just make an arrest. So she sees this kind of thing happening all the time, and she sees another girl, another young woman in her community. And because she has sharp eyes, trained, if you will, by that experience about what's happening in this girl's life, she figures out that this girl is also being abused by her father. And so she intervenes to try to help this girl. And again, and this girl, she did tell the police. She did come forward in a public way. And then she is so beaten up by the justice system, even she isn't sure if she's better off, having put herself and her family and all the rest of it through this. So into this comes our hero, the first young woman who who's been living with this and recovering from it, and then she helps this girl to navigate her own problems and helps her to get to make her way through it. So that's I don't know if I'm telling too much about the story for people who haven't read the book, but that's and so it's restorative justice all throughout, because people are hurt by crime and people want to get better and they want to help each other get better, and what are their needs as victims, and how are they being answered, or to be more precise, not being answered by the justice system, and what is the justice system doing instead? It's not protecting people, it's not helping people, but look at all those folks getting locked up. And so again, it's a story, but all of that is what I like to think that people like you and people like us will talk about after we're done having a good time with it. That's my mission in life, anyway. I've been talking a lot, so point me somewhere else or ask me a new question or something.
I mean, one of the things that you're really highlighting, I think, Eric, is that on one hand, your story, this book that you've written, is about what the criminal justice system or the criminal legal system has failed to do for people who have been victimized by crime, and particularly in this case, you're talking especially about sexual abuse. But on the other hand, what the criminal legal system or the criminal justice system is doing that is harmful. Can you talk a little bit more about why you decided to kind of contrast these issues that sometimes we don't talk about at the same time, particularly in a story like this?
It's interesting because, in my policy life, we talk about I like it though when you say criminal legal system, not criminal justice system. I totally want to internalize that. I see where that comes from. So when we criticize the criminal legal system, it's excessive mandatory minimums or excessive sentencing or inadequate mental health or drug treatment or school to prison pipeline or whatever it might be. And as we all know, victims tend to disappear. They're nothing but witnesses, if that. And especially because in so many crimes, there isn't a victim in the direct sense, drug crimes, let's say. And so the victims just kind of disappear. And when you do see victims, they are, forgive me, I will regret saying this, they are weaponized. The victims are used as weapons. You're trying to reform the penal code, reduce mandatory minimums, let's say, and then the opponents say, yes, but what about the victims? And I'm trying to have treatment, not jail. And somebody says, yes, but what about the victims? And out come victims who talk about their terrible victimization, and I don't want to deny that they might have been. But if you want to reduce victimization, we need more treatment, not jail. We need more mental health. We need more of this stuff. Why are you opposing it in the name of the victims? And so I'm worried about this weaponization of victims, where they're used against reform and they're used as opponents. They're in some ways co-opted as voices or whatever it might be. And so in a world of most criminal justice, it's all complaining, it's all bad stuff. And then even when it's a happy thing, it's, a drug addict goes clean and gets a job. Yay, I'm happy for that story. That's a good story. A death row inmate is exonerated. That's a good story. And the story that I just thought needs telling and needs more telling is a victim who gets better. Partly because victims disappear, and partly because victims, everybody is different, and I don't want to criticize somebody who continues to struggle after all of these years. But a lot of victims do get better, and I remember my beginning, I wanted a happy ending. So I wanted to tell a story of a victim who can get better. And what victim should it be? The worst possible crime. Because if it's the worst possible crime and even she can get better, then maybe other people can too. I'm going to go off script for 1 minute because I remind myself now regarding the top end crimes, starting with the worst crimes. I don't know if you remember when Jerry Miller decarcerated the juvenile justice system juvenile legal system in Massachusetts in the 1970s. He closed down all the youth detention centers, whatever they were called, the juvenile jails. And he closed them all, and everybody got out. It's a great book about it. It's called Last One Over the Wall. It's nonfiction. It's Jerome Miller, Last One Over the Wall, about how he shut down the juvenile jails in Massachusetts. The reason I'm thinking of him is when Jerry closed down the jails, he started with the murderers. He started with the worst cases. He started with the deep ends. He didn't start with, my instinct. You should start with technical violators. You should start with, non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offenders. All the, the non. Start with the easy cases and then build up from there. And Jerry said, then you have to fight for every inch. And when you go up 1 inch, they say, no, that won't work. You win, you go up another inch. Give me 10 years of data, and then we'll see if it. And so what Jerry said was, I'm going to start with the worst cases. And if it can work for murders, then, well, obviously it can work for everybody below that. And so he started at the top end. So I thought that was very politically interesting. Secretly, I kind of observe that murder tends to be a low recidivism crime anyway. It's a unique circumstance and probably a unique victim, as opposed to drug addiction, which is up and down and in and out, and it lingers for years. But so Dr. Miller started with murders, and with that in the back of my mind, in my victim story, I wanted the worst possible victim I can possibly imagine, and how can even she have a happy ending? And if even she can have a happy ending, then surely somebody who has had a different kind of victimization, they can have a happy ending too. And forgive me, I say it again. What do they need? How can we get them there? And who is responsible for what? And the justice system isn't doing it that way, because they're all busy locking up perpetrators and making arrests and denying parole because, well, what about the victims? There might be another one. And so the justice system is busy, the legal system is busy doing other things, and it's not protecting people who need protection, helping people who've been hurt, because it's too busy locking up all of these people for not really, in many cases, not very good reasons. So again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but that's the background and the backstory. And I wanted that. And again, from a bad beginning to a happy ending.
Yes, and your book does so much more. It offers so much more than critique. You've mentioned that you're presenting restorative justice not as a program, but really as this kind of needs-based justice that people are doing in relation to one another. Can you talk a little bit more about the role that restorative justice plays in your novel?
Well, that's very interesting. And I thought about when writing it, and I did my research and I interviewed some people like you. I don't believe you were one of the people I interviewed, but I interviewed practitioners and I read books. Sujata is in my Bhagavad Gita, in my acknowledgments. Right, we all know, we all worship at the feet of. And so I was doing and programs, and I thought about and people said, why don't you put her into a program? And I thought about making it a program. But then I'd have to spend all of this time on the program architecture and the program design and the program management. She's going to go to sessions, and they're going to be scheduled, who's going to be there, and what's the schedule, and what happens in week 1, and what happens in week 2, or day 1 and day 2. And I was worried that it will become a management story. And this is a personal story. And so I kept it out of even a restorative system and just made it, what does a person need? And how can she get better? And without help, it's really important, this is without help, what do people grope and grasp and find their way to? Because what they will grope and grasp and find their way to, that's the essence of healing. That's the essence of restorative justice. That's the thing that the hungry person needs. Not because the program director made it available to them, but because they needed it, and they looked at what was available. They grasped onto what they could, and they rejected what wouldn't help them. And so it starts with me at my desk with obviously books and background and interviews and so forth. But I'm putting myself into the mind and heart and soul of this woman and saying, what do I need to do? Followed immediately by, what do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do tomorrow? So even at the beginning of helping, remember, product of an incestuous rape. And the beginning of help is, do you need a paternity test? She's pregnant. She's a baby, right? She's pregnant with her father's baby. She does not need a paternity test. That's something that she is offered and does not need. She does not need a ride home. She just made a deliberate decision. I'm getting out of there. And so the helping systems are offering paternity tests and ride home. Well, that's not what she needs. What she needs is a place to stay tonight. And do you know what else she needs? A place to stay tomorrow night. And so this is how she's surviving and functioning. And then there's a certain hunkering down because all of the, the personal emotional damage, and she's been victimized. And there's a lot in here, and I'm glad I'm thinking of this, because her dad is victimizing her, and her dad is the perpetrator, and her dad is the bad guy. But she lives in her home, and her mom never helped. And her mom, there's a betrayal by her mom, which is as bad, worse than, I don't want to do the rankings, but it was really a problem about her mom, and her mom who was never there for her when she needed her, and her mom who didn't listen when she tried to complain. He's not looking at you. He was just checking for ticks. He wasn't spying on you in the bathroom. He just needed some aspirin from the closet. And so mom was never helping. And so there's a betrayal from the mother as well. Well, here I've got a victim. What is she going to do about that? And so it's big, and so she is intuiting her way to what she needs to survive. And then when she meets the other young woman, the other girl, middle school, high school, I forget, but young teen, 12 years old, I think. And she finds her way to that girl. And again, it's the intuiting. What does this girl need? How do I get it to her? What can I do to help? And then when she does offer the help, I like to think that the reader will go, yes, thank goodness. That's exactly what she needed, and how and when. And the victim might also, the reader might also observe that the victim services agency was not offering that to her. The victim services agency was saying, so your dad's coming up for sentencing. How many years do you think he should get? Answer, I don't know. She doesn't know. And she wants him to go away, but that doesn't mean she wants him locked up and sexually abused in prison. That's not making her happy either. And so she's confused and she doesn't know. And now here comes a soulmate to, rescue's the wrong word, but help her find her way to what will work for her. And then I like to think that the reader, this just feels natural. I can believe that would happen. And the restorative justice practitioner can read it and go, yes, that's exactly what's needed. That's exactly what's missing. And then hopefully, somebody else, judges, prosecutors, you name it, other system actors can look at it and say, yeah, why don't we do more of that? And then somebody else can say, oh, you're not budgeted, but you have a, but look what you're spending. What if we diverted some of this money and did it to there? So that's more backstory.
Oh, that's helpful, Eric. I think what you're saying is so fascinating because on one hand, your book is helping us to imagine restorative justice outside of a program. And so many times, many of us emphasize that restorative justice is a philosophy. It's a framework, right? That's based upon kind of meeting everyone's needs that are impacted by harm. But then at the same time, we often, when we imagine it in practice, we box it into a program. We have a hard time imagining it outside of a program. So what you're saying, I think it's so important because your book helps to lift up restorative justice kind of outside of that box, but at the same time, you're saying it has something to offer and something to teach those who are working in programs.
So yes, and thank you very much. I will definitely accept it that way. But I don't mean in any way to criticize programs. Because once you go to scale and once you make it a budget item and you have staff who are doing it, and then there's commonalities across cases at the same time, there's differences in every case. And so yes, of course, we want it to become institutionalized and programmatic, but the rules are built around, well, what would a victim need and how will she get there? And here I have somebody who doesn't have the benefit of any of the apparatus, and it's like, well, if you want to know what people need to eat, put the starving person out there and see what they do. And then you can start to see, how people go about getting their food. And so that's who she is. She wants to get better. And then if she starts to get better, let us indulge that she wants to help somebody else too. And she doesn't want to, but she sees it happening, and actually she kind of moves heaven and earth and risks her job and doesn't show up for some things her kids want her for because she needs to go help this girl.
Eric, I've read Making Manna, and I really enjoyed it. As I told you before, many of our participants likely have not read the book yet, I will say. Can you share an excerpt of it with us and then tell us about what you've chosen to share?
I would love to. Thank you. That makes excellent sense. And since I already wrote it, it's easier than thinking of new things to say. So I don't know if this works. This is Making Manna. This is a 2015 book, available at bookstores near you, or Amazon, wherever you want. All right. Making Manna, Chapter 1. Her screams are so loud, even the dogs run cowering into the barn. Libby Thompson, 14 years old, lies on her bed, naked and in labor. She's drenched in sweat, muscles taut with strain. Her knees are up, her outsized belly an island in the middle. Who's the father? Asks her mother, Eva Louise Thompson. Libby says nothing. Tell me, please. The next contraction rips a scream so powerful a cracking sound comes from the window pane and powder drips down from the ceiling. Libby's whole body clenches in the spasm. When it's done, her mother passes her an ice cube from a bowl by the bed. Libby pops it briefly in her mouth, then spits it out and rubs it gently over her face and belly. For a moment, her muscles unwind and she's a tired little girl. Thanks, Mom. She's in her own bedroom. Her school medals line one wall, spelling, math, and track, and her favorite books line the shelf. In a photo by the bed, she's riding her horse, Shadow Dancer, dappled gray. Behind it hangs a picture of Shadow Dancer she drew in crayon when she was 10. The next contractions are less violent and barely elicit moans as Libby bears down hard. She swabs herself with her towel and asks her mother to adjust the fan. It's only 10 in the morning, but in the hills of Southwest Virginia in August, it's hot already. Only a few more, says her mother. You're almost there. Tell me now. Who's the father? The bedroom door slams open and old Joseph Thompson bursts into the silence. Old Joe, Libby's father, Eva's husband. His black hair is plastered against his head with sweat and his hands are dirty from some kind of a chore. Is she done yet? Is it born? Eva Louise leaps to her feet and stands between old Joe and her daughter's wide open legs. Get out, she hollers. Anywhere but here. Old Joe delivers livestock in the spring, but he's never cared about the birth of a baby. Old Joe steps around his wife and keeps his attention between his daughter's legs. How much longer? Libby aims what's left of her ice cube at his head, but misses by a yard. Go away! Never want to see you again. Now, dear, be nice to your father, Eva implores as she takes old Joe by the elbow and guides him out the door, closing it firmly behind him. This is hard for all of us. She hurries back as the baby's head comes into view and Libby groans in newfound pain. Libby pulls the towel over her head and separates herself from the walls. And it's done. One little push, one last groan, and one dangerous, delicate moment later, Eva Louise is holding a baby in her hands, pink and slippery and crying. The whole world falls into place the instant she sees the child. Even as Eva Louise cuts the cord, swabs him clean, and announces he's a boy, she understands why old Joe cares so much about this baby. Now she can see why old Joe refused to get the truth out of his daughter when she confessed her condition, and why he hovered around when the screaming started. Now she knows why Libby refused to name the father. The boy in her hands is a spitting image of the man who just left. Thick black hair and flattened chin, she's holding an infant version of old Joseph Thompson, her own husband, Libby's father. She's always known the mother. Now she sees the father too. Now I'm going to skip a page or two. There's some bad stuff. We're going to fast forward towards the end. There's some arguing, some bad things happen, there's some shouting. You can imagine there's disagreement in the home. Libby grabs her baby off the chopping block, off the kitchen counter, and wraps him in a dish towel, and shoots out of the room as fast as her legs can carry her. No more, she yells as she slams the door. Never again. She sets out on foot toward the town where old Joe goes to get drunk and buy supplies. The sun is setting by the time Libby reaches the main road. She carries the baby comfortably against her chest, but everything else is wrong. Her old flannel shirt keeps slipping off her shoulders, and her loose shorts barely stay up while she walks. Her old sneakers pick up a pebble through a hole. The Safeway truck picks her up on Route 29 like it's been sent from heaven. She sits down in the front seat, and the trucker doesn't say a word, doesn't ask her any questions. He leaves her alone to hug her child and nurse her pain. An hour later, he stops at a Walmart and buys her 2 sets of clothes. One to wash, one to wear, he says quietly. He pays with cash and gives her the change plus $60 more from his wallet. He drops her at a police station near the Safeway Depot in Fairfax, Virginia, the suburbs of Washington, D.C., as far that night as he plans to go. Libby names her baby after that trucker. She never learns his name, but she calls him Angel. Yeah, that's chapter 1. Slightly truncated, but that was chapter 1. But I do.
Wow. It's I mean, I've read it, but hearing you read it was even more compelling. Thank you for reading that for us, Eric.
No, I'm sorry. I went too quick because it was so. I would say just one more thing.
Mm-hmm. Please.
You and we know because we just read it. We know that Libby needs help and a hug, right? Libby, this girl who just got off the road, this girl needs help and a hug. But what the world sees is just another goddamn single teenage woman. That's what the world sees. And the police do not greet her with help and a hug. And so this is, and so how does she survive? What does she do? And she is in low-income single mom America. The roommate who takes her in is African American. All of a sudden, this rural white girl has to learn why to be afraid of the police, and that the police are not always your friends. So that's anyhow, sorry.
That is actually one of the questions I was going to ask you. Next is about your strong character development. I actually read some of the reader reviews that I've seen online, and one of the things that several readers noted was your strong character development. But one of the aspects that I like you to talk about first in relation to the character development is your portrayal of race and class. One of the main characters, Libby, who you just read about, who is the one who's raped, consistently raped by her father before the story opens, is a white girl from a rural area. And then the woman that ends up befriending her and taking her in is an older African-American woman from a low-income community. She has a daughter, and then we have, of course, the man that she's in a relationship with, who's also African-American. So can you just talk a little bit more about your choices for your characters around race and class, particularly in relation to what happens to them, which you've just read about, Libby, being molested, being raped by her father, the drug, the war that's happening that affect the characters. So can you just kind of unpack that a little bit? Why did you choose to portray these characters as you did, particularly in relation to the issues that impact their lives?
Okay, thank you. That's a fair question. I'll try to get all the pieces, and then you'll hold me to the ones that I forgot. Some things are very deliberate. Libby has to be white. And so when we think when political America thinks about family dysfunction and intra-family crimes and domestic abuse and things, for whatever reason, why are they thinking of Black people or urban Black people and the dysfunctional inner cities? And so I go right to the heartland, to pure rural America. And so we've got white kids in rural America who are suffering from these kinds of problems. And then the second girl who she helps, when she gets to Fairfax, Virginia, who she starts helping, she's not just a white girl, she's affluent, middle class, high functioning family, where it's really important that yes, dads like that do that too, affluent, high functioning white America. So I wanted to show intra-family dysfunction in forget me, the good America. And then at the same time, she's surviving. She's in low-income America, where the community asset building, the community assets, where like people do each other a favor and people help each other. And if you need a tool, if I need a tool, I go to Home Depot and buy it. But when Libby needs a tool, somebody else in the building has a tool and knows how to use it. And so the community is always helping each other. And so I'm showing this, the urban minority, the low-income America, with all of these community assets and all of this helping and all of this success and all of this, family hugging and assistance, and we're all in it together, and they're succeeding like that. And they'll even take in the foreign white girl because, look, that's a baby, she needs help. And I need a roommate, or this person, I know that this cleaning woman needs an assistant to help clean the house, and she needs work. Let's put that together. And it's not Wall Street trading, but it's people looking out for and helping each other and helping strangers and helping family and making it work. And then at the same time, low-income America, there's these police who are just kind of around, and they are sometimes helpful. They do a favor or two. I don't want to deny them that. But on the whole, that's a lot of resource. That's Sheila, who takes young Libby in and helps her out. She also kind of trains her about what you need to be careful of and how things go wrong. And of course, bad things do end up happening with the police. There's one scene in particular, and maybe I'm moving away from victims, or moving away from your question, but one scene in particular, the police are very aggressive in this scene, and they're very tough. And it's interesting, this book came out in 2015, so I've been stumping it for close to 2 years by now, that I go to book groups and I go to readings and I discuss it. It was really interesting because, let's call it 2 years ago, especially white audiences spoke specifically about that chapter where the police are very aggressive, and they say, police don't do things like that. That would never happen. You didn't make that believable enough. You should have backed it down or explained it more, because but I didn't believe it. Nobody else will believe it. That's stuff like that doesn't happen. And so 2 years ago, let's call it pre-Black Lives Matter, white audience were actually questioning it that way. And call it 2 years later, post, Ferguson, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, post Black Lives Matter, nobody ever asks me that anymore. Nobody ever challenges, including white audiences. Nobody challenges me about that scene with the police. So, forgive me. I want to say I want to go back to chapter 1 for just one moment here. There's this one little line. This is one of my favorite little lines that nobody has ever commended me on. So I'm going to have to do it myself. And I've never talked about this in a book group or anything. This one little line, is she done yet? Is it born? And the dad walks into the room, starts looking between his daughter's legs, right? And what is it? I'm looking for it. So Libby aims what's left of her ice cube at his head, but misses by a yard. Go away. I never want to see you again. Now, dear, be nice to your father. And what just happened was Libby did everything in her power to get this man away from her. And what she does is she throws something at him and she misses by a yard. She's not even close. She has been wanting him to stop for a long time. She's doing what's in her power to make him stop. And even now, she's in labor. He's looking up her legs and she throws the ice cube at his head and she misses by a yard. And what does her mother do? Now, dear, be nice to your father. She fundamentally takes the father's side. Now, she splits the difference a little bit. She moves him out. She tries to stand between him and the legs, but he goes around her. She moves him outside. She lets him go behind. So she kind of takes the daughter. She's splitting the difference a little bit. But she aims what's left of her ice cube at his head and misses by a yard. Now, dear, be nice to your father. That's just an important little moment for what had been going on in their relationship for all of these years, where she needed mom, she needed a friend, she needed an ally, and she wasn't getting it from her mother. And that betrayal is something that's very deep, that takes a long time to resolve. Forgive me, I should have been talking about the good stuff when she's out on the street and she's in neighborhoods, and the people are helping each other with daycare, with tools, with things broken down. Please ask me another question. I'm starting to ramble.
No. I think that's so important. I think it also is related to the initial question I asked about the character development, because I'm interested not only in the race, class, even gender of the characters, but also one question I have related to the character development is, sexual abuse is a topic, and particularly as it relates to incest, is a topic that we don't often talk about, at least publicly. People have a great difficulty talking about this topic. When people think about child sexual abuse, they typically think about stranger danger and kind of this image of a predator, although most child sexual abuse happens, is perpetrated by family members, right, or close relatives, close, family members are close friends of the family. This is where it happens. And so many times, those of us who are survivors, will say, it's not that we want this person to go to prison, but we do want the violence to stop. And I thought you portrayed that very well in the novel. So one question that I have for you is around the research that you did on sexual abuse, particularly in terms of incest, to be able to portray the perspectives, especially of Libby, but also other characters that were impacted in this way. How did you research your novel?
It's interesting. It's a good question, and I'm going to answer it unfairly. It wasn't so much that I researched this novel; it's that I had done all of this research. I have written and published papers about it. I have talked to therapists. I attended group therapy sessions with sex offenders. I worked with victims on plenty of occasions, and so it was less that I needed to research things for the book, although for sure I looked up this or that. But fundamentally, I already had it going on. And then this stuff that I have written and published about in the nonfiction context just came out differently. There's one little scene you talk about, the stranger danger. So Libby escapes with her newborn son, Angel, and he's a little baby. But then, so then as the book goes on, he grows up, he becomes more of a character, there's more going on with him, he grows up, 3, 5, 9, but he's aging. And one scene that I kind of like anyway is where, because Libby, again, she's surviving, but she's in some ways burying things, is Angel brings home from school good touch, bad touch, and stuff like that. Stranger danger warnings, Halloween, be careful at trick or treat, don't accept candy from strangers. All this, the kids are bringing these kinds of lessons home from school, and Libby sees this happening, and she knows just how not responsive this is, and just how much this wouldn't have helped her in any way, and how in some ways it's distracting. And so there's a scene between Angel and Libby, and invisibly in the background is Libby's teacher, and this is one of those places where Libby's scars become vivid, where the fact that she still has more work to do and she hasn't worked it all out, and it's the stranger danger material coming home from school that triggers her and makes her say, "Hello, that's not what I needed." And again, what I'm saying to the policy people is, hello, that's not what she needs. And as you were just saying, that's not where the victimization is. It's not the strangers. It's the people in the circle, the families, the friends, the coaches, forgive me, the priests. And so that's where, and so that's part of the story that I'm getting at there. Mm-hmm. But again, it's all character. Poor Libby. I want you to read that scene and go, oh, poor girl. She's doing so well. No, she's really not. There's stuff that's not right. There was a scene I wanted to write. Stop me when I go really bad. There was a scene I wanted to write where she's in the dentist's office. I wanted her. She's now responsible for her son and her roommate's son. When the roommate gets hauled off to jail, all the stuff from the black roommate gets hauled off to jail, and she's now responsible for her daughter too. And she's, in loco parentis, she's the parent for this. Now it's a family of 3, even if not legally, she's taking care of the girl and her roommate's daughter, former roommate's daughter. And I wanted her to go to the dentist. I wanted her to go to the doctor. And there was a scene that I wanted to write with Libby in the dentist's office where a man is putting things down her mouth, and it's uncomfortable, and she's lying on her back, and he's putting things down into her mouth, and you can see where somebody who's been sexually abused, that you can see a powerful scene to be done there with the dentist putting things into her mouth. And do you know why I didn't write that scene? It raised a whole different problem of low-income America that I didn't want to grapple with. She's seeing a dentist. What kind of health plan does she have? Does she have dental work? Is she able to do primary preventative dental care? Who paid for the dentist? And so there's a whole raft of questions that are actually relevant in this barely employed, without benefits, etc. America. And I just didn't want to raise that network of questions. It was too much. And so I gloss over and don't really approach the fact that, yeah, how is she living without health care? This is pre-Obamacare. And, how does that happen? And then at the same time, but it meant that I couldn't, so I just don't address that. So I don't have it scene where the dentist put things in the
Oh,
and again, showing her trying to make her way.
Wow. I want to go back to something you said just a bit ago about when I asked you about the research, and you said that you had already done so much research in writing as someone who was a legal advocate, kind of a policy advocate. You did a lot of writing around policy. And so, having done so much nonfiction writing around criminal justice issues, the criminal legal system, around restorative justice, and we have so much nonfiction work out there. Can you tell us a bit more about why you chose fiction, and what promise or potential do you see fiction having for raising awareness about restorative justice more generally and promoting this justice that heals?
Because stories could be popular. People could like it. I think I like reading nonfiction. A lot of people do, and probably a lot of us have read Bryan Stevenson's recent book. What is it? Just Mercy, and The New Jim Crow, and those are great, and those are moving the dial and shifting the needle, and that's nonfiction, and it's really working. And there's a whole lot of nonfiction that's been published out there that hasn't been working, and I could list the books that people haven't read, including mine. And so then the question is can storytelling do it differently? And it's intended to be different. It's just a different it's a different diet. It's something that somebody who doesn't read nonfiction might enjoy, and they can again talk about it with their friends, talk about it in a group, whatever it might be. It's storytelling can be fun. And I get to give you a happy ending, which is a little bit fictional. If I say Horatio Alger, does that compute? Horatio Alger story? And people hear, oh, Horatio Alger, rags to riches, right? I don't know if people have heard that, Horatio Alger, rags to riches. I wish I were in an audience with live people and I could say, Horatio Alger story, who has ever actually read one? Nobody ever has. Well, I read a bunch of them. That was research for this book. I wanted to see how Horatio Alger stories go. And Horatio Alger stories, first of all, they are rags to riches. Actually, they aren't rags to riches. They are rags to survival. They are rags to a job. And it's interesting to me that it became rags to riches as opposed to rags to a minimum wage job, but at least you're on the ladder. And so that is interesting to me. But the main thing is that Horatio Alger was a social critic. And what he showed were starving children and the street urchins and homeless people in the streets of, let's call it New York City, but it doesn't have to be there. And then, so everybody knows that they're homeless people, and you look away and you kick them aside, get out of here. I don't want squeegee man on my windows. I don't want kids underfoot. I don't want, get out of here. And then Horatio Alger started writing popular stories with, again, these same people and these same kids. But when you see on the street, it's go away, I don't want you underfoot. But then when you meet them as characters in fiction, you're like, oh my God, they root through trash cans looking for food. They sleep in the sandbox. A cardboard box is a prize for them because they can use it as both a mattress and a blanket. And this is all in Horatio Alger's stories, where these kids are characters who you care about, who you want to succeed. And then out of the success of Horatio Alger fiction, there is still a Horatio Alger society that you can give money to. Laws were passed. Homeless shelters, what we now call homeless shelters. Now you can give money to them, or they get public money or whatever it is, but call it 100 years ago, things like that didn't even exist. And so the first homeless shelter kinds of things were, I don't know the history quite well enough, but this movement, if you will, the Horatio Alger stories helped to propel this movement of doing good, and forgive me, I'll say it again, Christian charity, and this kind of mobilization, and legislation was passed, and it was very much inspired by Horatio Alger and his stories. Wouldn't that be cool if I could do that, if I could write a Horatio Alger story that not only is fun to read, his are fun to read, but also has that kind of a social impact? That's what I daydream of. That's what I was daydreaming of when I wrote the book. That's what I was daydreaming about.
I think it can definitely have that impact, and that actually relates to another question I have. But just want to say something to those of you who are joining us in the webinar. In just a moment, we're going to come to you for your questions, and so the way that you engage in discussion is to go to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your window, and you can submit a question or a comment for Eric, and then I'll be sharing those questions as you submit them. So we'll just be going to that in just a moment. So go ahead. If you have any questions, comments, ways you'd like to engage in dialogue with Eric about his work, and particularly about making Manna, about the use of fiction to spread awareness of restorative justice, or perhaps other arts and media, or other relevant questions, please do go ahead and share your questions. Go to the Q&A box and submit those questions or comments that you have. So Eric, I mentioned earlier that I really enjoyed reading Making Manna, and I think it could be a helpful resource even in the classroom. It's something that works as pleasure reading, but it also, we can learn a lot from it. So I think it can work in a variety of different ways. What's the reception that you've received from readers, and has Making Manna had the impact or reception that you've hoped for, at least in this early stages? I know that it's only it's not quite that old yet. So
Right.
So if you can just tell us a little bit about the reception that you've gotten so far from those who've read the book.
Well, I'm going to answer that twice. The people who've read the book really like it. And the people who've read the book are getting out of it exactly what they wanted, what I wanted. They're having a good time. They're enjoying it. They love the characters. They want to know how it ends. I'm getting all of the satisfaction I could possibly want from an author, where people are getting out of the book what I was hoping that they would get, in particular, a good time and some critical thinking as they wish. So it's succeeding in that sense. It is not succeeding in the sense that my publisher and I, we kind of botched the release, and we did some stuff wrong, and our marketing was imperfect, and not as many people have read the book as I wish had read the book. So we're doing quite well in the sense of people who read it like it, not as well in the sense of, is it moving the needle? Well, first somebody has to read it. And so it's not doing as well as I wish that it had, or that it still could. And in fact, some people say, yeah, that's the best way to market your second book is or your third, let's call it your second book, is with the success of your third book. And the best way to market your third book is with your fourth book. And it wasn't until my ninth book that all of a sudden it took off and people started reading all of my previous books. So I definitely hear stories like that, where it's, fifth, sixth, seventh book gets you the attention you want. I'll see if I can live that long. But so it's doing well. The readers like it, which is all I can really ask for. And as I'm sure you know, because you've written this or that, or you stand in front of an audience, it's pretty scary, the very first reader. When the first book first goes public, and I can't make edits anymore. And if there's anything in there, and especially, and now I'm going to get really personal about it, as a white male who was not the victim of a serious sex crime, am I going to say something wrong about this young woman who is? I was scared that I would say something that was disrespectful of victims, or insensitive to women in general, or whatever it might be. I was really scared about that. Let alone the what if people find it boring? What if people don't want to read it to the end? What if they lose interest by chapter 3? and they only read it as a favor when they got to chapter 1. So I'm happy to say, that's a high dive. The author comes out, the book is out there, and I'm very happy to see that people like it and they're getting out of it what I wanted them to. So yay! And then not enough people are reading it, but life is long.
And you mentioned future books. So what's next?
I'm daydreaming a little bit. You mentioned in the intro, I have been working for organized labor for a couple of years now. And again, this making Manna comes out of my time in the justice system. Well, now I've been doing organized labor for a couple of years. Don't you think maybe I should write a book about labor unions? Maybe that could be interesting to do. They're misunderstood. I had to learn a lot about them. I went from saying, labor unions, aren't they old and obsolete? To, wait a minute, we really need them. Working people working together. That's how they get their fair share. And so I could cook something up on labor unions. I think that might be interesting to do. Mm-hmm. Or maybe I go back to justice because there's so many stories to tell. I have, there's any number of books that if I didn't have a day job, I could have 2 books written for you by next year. But sadly or happily, I have a day job with healthcare. I don't have these problems. The problems that Libby that Libby dodges in making that. So hit me with a question.
Whatever project you decide, I'll be looking to read that one too.
Excellent. I'll tell you what more could I hope for? Right?
A lot more.
I like this one so much I'll read another.
Yes, that's right. So here's a question we have for one of our participants. She says that this person says, I'm looking forward to reading Making Manna. Thanks for your presentation today. Restorative justice principles and practices are gaining traction with the court system, but many of us still see value in the traditional system, albeit with reform. Do you see any role for it? And I think this question is coming out. Perhaps also, we've talked a lot about kind of the way the book critiques the criminal legal system, but do you see any role for that system, albeit with some reform?
Right. So it's going to end up being a 2-part answer. And the first is, yes, of course. I mean, there has to be one. If for no other reason, this is the second part, then because it exists. And you can't just make, even if we were writing on a blank slate and we were inventing a whole new system, might it look radically different? Could we have prison abolition? I think that maybe we could. It could be imagined differently, but I don't think we get to write on a blank slate. And so at the same time that we need to take care of the victims, and we need to look at how we can help them and who's responsible to help them. But then at the same time, did a person commit a crime? Is there not a place for them to be put to proof? Cross-examination of witnesses, actual evidence proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We need reform. We desperately need reform. I want to challenge the evidence. I don't want everything to be settled by plea. I want there to be, cross-examination and, all the rest of it. And so there's a place for, okay, you said I committed a crime. Well, prove it before you lock me up, or before you even send me to drug treatment, whatever it might be. So I don't think we can get rid of the system. Could we imagine it differently? Yes. Could we get there from here? No. Or maybe if we start building alternative systems. And so I'll make up the numbers right now. The alternatives are getting 0.5% of the caseload, and the next year they can maybe get 1% of the caseload, and in 10 years can they be taking 5% of the caseload, and then there's a tipping point, and it's 50%, and might someday it be that the traditional system becomes obsolete or irrelevant. Like I was just accusing labor unions. Maybe we could get there, but I don't know that we can shut it off immediately. And some of those questions remain important. Who actually did it, and how do you know? And let's call it the defendant side. And I don't know that we can make that disappear. And the people making decisions would have names like judges, and the people listening to the evidence would have names like juries. Not the only way it could be done, but with reform, it could continue to have a role. Was that an answer?
I think definitely you did. And for the person who asked that, if you want to submit a follow-up question, feel free to do that. So another question I know you get quite frequently, Eric, is about the title of your book. We haven't talked about that yet. It's clearly a biblical reference in the title. So can you explain the title, and then related to that, what role does faith, spirituality, or religion in a Christian context or otherwise play in the novel?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that question. And another piece of research, another thing that I went to again and again when I was writing this book, I kept reading the book of Matthew. In some ways, I said, this is my version of the book of Matthew.
Wow.
The original is better, it turns out. But this, this is Matthew to me. This is what I'm trying to do here. And so it's, in some ways, it's, infused religiously. It's forgiveness, it's care, it's all traditional, religious virtues. And making manna, it's funny. And so it starts with the product of an incestuous rape, and it ends up in a bakery, right? That's where we go in the end. And the cover art probably isn't on the screen, but you can see what it is. Yes, that is a loaf of bread that they are standing on. They have made a loaf of bread, and so they're making. And so in the Bible, manna comes from heaven, but in the real world, you have to make your own. And so that's the personal responsibility. And the Libby, she's kind of on her own here, and she needs to do this. But then there's the collective responsibility. She has so many friends and so many inputs from others, and I don't want to make this into the simplified rags to riches. Lift yourself up by your bootstraps, and because she gets credit, a lot of bootstrapping going on, but at the same time, neighbors and friends and help. And the trucker right there from chapter one, the trucker, 2 sets of clothes, one to wash, one to wear, and $60 from his wallet, and he's quiet. It's just what she needed. And so there's community right from the beginning, but you got to make your own manna, and yes, deliberately religious in that way. Care for your neighbors.
And I'm very fascinated by you saying that you wanted to make this kind of a version of Matthew. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, I appreciate the reference to manna. That really makes sense to me. It's really clear. But can you unpack that a little bit more?
Okay, so Matthew, yes. So manna is in Exodus, which is a whole testament away from Matthew.
Right? Yes.
But I am omnivorous in that regard, and Matthew, this is the turn the other cheek. This is the if you can't throw a stone unless why am I getting he who is without sin throw the first stone. And forgive me, I haven't read it lately, because that's why I keep opening it again. But this is the forgiveness, and this is the kindness to your neighbor, and love them as yourself, and especially the turning of the other cheek, and the not throwing stones if you have sinned, and everybody has sinned. And so this is just and so I keep on coming to the forgiveness. The ultimate resolution is not when the perpetrator goes to prison. That's not what we are looking for. That's not what she is looking for. That's not what she needs. That's not what the other victim that she comes across later needs. And in fact, that's all distracting. That's irrelevant. What people need is to get better. And forgiveness and understanding is part of it. The ultimate scene, the confrontation she has with her mom, is right out of restorative justice, and out of victim offender reconciliation and things like that. And of course, in the real world, it would take place over weeks or months or long time with mediators and so forth. And in the book, I have it happen in much faster than that, and unmediated. But the basic dynamic is that Libby is saying, "Why didn't you help me?" And mom is saying, "How could I have known?" I didn't know. And I hope that sounds familiar to people. And what do you mean you didn't know? I told you, you weren't listening. I couldn't believe it. I didn't, and so there's a denial going on, and ultimately we need an I am sorry. We need an I am sorry. But the you didn't protect me, I didn't know, is, that comes right from that is experience. That's what they look like.
And I just want to put in a plug for those who are participating, to feel free to submit your questions at any time. You have questions not only about making Manna, but even as Eric shares, questions that come to you, for example, about forgiveness. So you talked here about kind of forgiveness and how that is in many ways a theme that comes across, especially at the end in some ways. Have you received any feedback or pushback or resonance with those who you've talked about the book with in relation to this theme of forgiveness?
That's yes to that. That's the kind of thing that comes up, and a character who we haven't talked about. And forgive me, it's a little bit hard because I was delighted to read chapter 1, but there's other characters that we don't that emerge later. Mm-hmm. But there's one in particular who's the drug dealer, and who is Sheila's boyfriend or former boyfriend, or however we want to think of him. And actually, let's talk about him for a minute. Sure. And it'll end up being more practical than forgiveness. But he's to me an important and deliberate character because of who he is in this real world. I think in popular stereotypes, drug dealers are, rich guys, forgive me, usually black, who wear their gold chains and their silk things, and they drive their fancy cars, and that's who on TV or in popular wisdom, that's who drug dealers are. So they got the gold chains and the girls and the fancy cars and the silks, and that's who we think of as a drug dealer. And so Zeb, in my book, he is what I call a part-time drug dealer. And what he does is he has a job. He has a dead-end job. He loads boxes at the Best Buy, and he makes $9 an hour. And it isn't a living wage, and it isn't really enough. And he wants to care for his family, and he even wants to do treats like buy coffee on the way to work. He just wants a living wage, and it's not quite enough in modern America, what he's paid at the Best Buy. So he deals heroin on the weekends. He's a part-time drug dealer. And if he can make $80 or $100 on a weekend with a couple of deals and a couple of trades, well, that's what I need so that I can buy something for my daughter because she needs this new backpack for school, or she wants a cheerleading uniform, or I just want some money in the bank if something goes wrong. And this is a real character who we meet in let's call it the justice system of America. And so I wanted to make this character who's a part-time drug dealer, just because in conventional wisdom and popular understanding, we don't know that those guys even exist. And invisibly, the other thing that it's saying is, hey, if you gave him a raise, he wouldn't do it. And in fact, in the book, when he gets the raise is when he finally gives it up. And what he wants what we all want. He wants a place to live. He wants to stay with his family, and he wants some respect. And so I guess this all started with forgiveness. And I want you, the reader, who was angry at him when we hear that he's dealing drugs, and we don't like that he's dealing drugs. And by the way, he's dealing heroin. And there's a scene where the heroin addict is suffering very much, not necessarily his customer, but the point is, we, the reader, should read this and understand heroin is really bad, and drug addiction is really bad, and drug dealers are really dangerous, and drug dealers are really scary. And I see why his girlfriend kicked him out of the house unless he would give up dealing drugs. And I see why the other people talk about drug dealers like it's another name for the devil. And I see how badly drugs are hurting this person who's using drugs, and it's messing her up, and she can't take care of her daughter because she's hooked on heroin. And I want us to have all of that making us angry at this guy who's a drug dealer, and then we meet him and we understand where he's coming from, and we understand what he's trying to achieve, and we forgive him.
Hmm.
And as soon as he stops using drugs, and as soon as it stops dealing drugs, and as soon as he gets the better job, and as soon as he comes back to all he wanted to do was do right by his children, and then wait a minute, the fact that they have evidence that he was dealing last year, and he sold this many grams of heroin and this many glassines at this corner, and we've got you on tape here, and now he's going to get put away in prison? No, 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 I forgive him. I'm not interested in him going to prison going forward. I'm interested in him taking care of his daughter going forward. And I'm glad that he's not dealing drugs anymore. And I'm glad that that other young woman hooked on heroin. Well, she doesn't turn out so well as it happens. But I want her to, and I'm not, and I can't. I'm not angry at him. I'm forgiving him. And so we have forgiveness, throughout the book, and we have Libby in the backstory, and Libby's is the ultimate crime. But all the way through here, I want the readers to see people are making mistakes, and people are trying to do better, and people are helping each other, and people are angry, and people are forgiving, and all of those are pretty okay.
Yes. And I really appreciate you raising that with Zeb's character, because I did not. I mean, I definitely went through much of the journey that you noted. The many readers go through with not wanting him to be, incarcerated, or being, angry at these people who are coming and, tearing up the house looking for drugs when he's no longer involved in drug sales. So I guess, one question that I have related to this is about when, and I'm trying not to give away too much of the book for those who are gonna, hopefully go and read it, but, we have some of the characters who are incarcerated, and they are imprisoned in a place quite far away. And I messed up when I was introducing you. The Soros Justice Fellowship research that you were doing was around the census, right? How we count people who are incarcerated. And so, could you talk a little bit about that, and just that dimension of the book, as the practice of people being sent far away from home when they're incarcerated, and maybe even some of that I know you didn't completely unpack in the novel, but I think it's really important and really, really interesting.
Right. So thanks. I'm delighted to get to talk about that. And so when the daughter's father is incarcerated, or mother, family is incarcerated, and far away, and two things have to happen there. One is, and again, the family wants to stay together, and the daughter wants to talk to her mom, and the mom wants to talk to her daughter, and the family wants to stay together, and we the people should want them to want to stay together. And $1 a minute for the phone calls? Are you kidding me? And so the family is surviving that. Now we know, in what year is it, 2016, that the FCC changed that rule only recently. And by the way, that was my lawsuit back then that started that ball rolling, that changed that law, and a lot of advocacy after that. But I'm really happy about that. And when I was writing those chapters, I was like, people don't know this. People don't know this. And so we have this low-income family that somehow is cobbling together $10 so that they can have a 10-minute phone call. I forget what $10.75 for the 10-minute phone call. And that's research and math as if it matters for exactly how much it would cost, but it's accurate. $10.75 for the 10-minute phone call. And the low-income families is two things: cobbling together the $10 for the 10-minute phone call. They're trying to do it every week or every other week. I forget what it is, but they put that in the family budget, and they get it there. And then second, someday we hope, I want, and they can take a ride out to visit mom in prison, who is some number of hours away. And obviously the prison isn't on a bus line, and these people don't own cars, and they have jobs where they have to be working all kinds of hours to maybe have enough to pay the rent, let alone the extra $10 for the phone call. And so they are both, and so we see the obstacles that the real world puts into this family staying together, and the phone calls and the visits, and trying to maintain family unity that everybody agrees is a good thing, and B, look at how hard it is for them to manage it. Now, having said that, I'm going to answer the prefatory question. My census research, my actual Soros fellowship, none of that makes it into the book in any way. That's a pure data question. And the issue there is that the United States Census, the Census Bureau, every 10 years it does a head count, counts everybody in the country, uses the data for political apportionment. And the Census Bureau counts people in prison where they are locked up, not where they come from. And that's something that's not completely unreasonable and might once have made more sense. But now in the era of 2 million people, where it's, urban minority, Democratic leaning jurisdictions being counted in rural white Republican leaning jurisdictions, or what's even worse than that, the county or state legislative district with the prison compared to the county or state legislative district 5 miles to the north, they are a community of interest. They actually have a lot to do with each other as opposed to the urban jurisdiction, which is quite different. But those two rural communities of interest, well, one of them has the prison, and it ends up with 20% more votes in the legislature than you do because its prison counts for apportionment. And so the distortions of democracy caused by the Census Bureau, that was a product of my research. I'm going to call it 10 years ago, something like that. And I am hopeful the Census Bureau right this minute is considering doing it differently for the 2020 census. Go to justicepolicy.org and click your way and write to the Census Bureau or your representative or something. I don't know if there's an active action link, but I know a month or two ago there was an active action link, and the Census Bureau was actually taking comments on the question. And I am very hopeful that the Census Bureau will change its rule and count people who are convicted of crimes where they come from, not where they happen to be incarcerated on census day, because they're going home on average, 3 years later, long before the next 10-year census. So that was forgive me, I distract, but that's what my Soros research was on. Was on this the census prison count stuff.
And very important and still very, very relevant. I mean, even more so as we are in the final days leading up to our national elections, that it's important for people to understand that it's not a one-to-one correlation in terms of how people are, how many votes different jurisdictions are getting, and it's some, as you explained, have more because of the population of prisoners, of incarcerated people there, and that doesn't represent, so their votes get counted more, get weighed more. So I think that it's, although you didn't necessarily explore it specifically in that way in the novel, you do portray, this movement of the characters who are incarcerated to places far away. And so I think it can help people to make that next step once they learn about this policy issue, how important it is, and just what is behind that.
And how so many families are affected by it. So that she goes to the church on the weekends, and yes, it's a church, and this is what it looks like in the real world. She goes to a church on the weekend, and that they help her with the phone calls, they help her with the visits, and how deeply the justice system is implicated in the community, because everybody's going to the church for these same reasons, and everybody is struggling to make the phone calls, and everybody wants to take the, when the church rents the van and goes to the prison, and they go to a different prison every week. I checked the map. I think there were something like 50 state and federal prisons in Virginia, which is where the book takes place. And the way I made it in the book, I'm rounding, I don't remember exactly, but it's something like every weekend the church van goes to a different prison somewhere in the state, and they have no problem filling. That is a function that's being used and appreciated by the community, and the reader would be left with no doubt, hey, they could fill up a bigger van if they wanted to. They could take a trip. Yeah, they could take 2 trips a week and you have to wait a whole year before the prison where her mom happens to be locked up. The next time she comes her prison comes up. And of course, at that time, I have to have enough money in my pocket just to cover the cost of the transportation. And I know what's happening, and I'm going to build my schedule and save my money around having not that much. What is it, $30? I forget, to cover the costs of the van going to the prison, and how many other people are like that, and just the degree to which the intertwining of the justice system and the people incarcerated and the police everywhere, and the integration between the community and the justice system. That's something that I'm trying to convey.
And I really appreciated how you portrayed the role of the church in meeting this need of not just of the family, but many families, as you said, of this community, primarily a working class African American community in which many people are incarcerated far away. So our last webinar that we had was on restorative justice, restorative church, restorative theology. In light of the fact that you do portray the church as meeting this need, what role, if you have any thoughts on this, what role do you see churches playing, or what potential also do you see churches playing, to meet these kinds of needs, but particularly within poor working class African American communities and other communities of color that are especially impacted by mass incarceration?
And the churches are important. And I kind of miss it that back when I was doing more direct service, I would get to go downtown on Sunday morning and go to the churches where they're singing, and there's just a lot of humanity going on, and the churches are really important I'm going to say African American communities. And when I say African American, I don't in any way mean to exclude Hispanic communities. I just don't speak Spanish and don't go there. So I'm sure I fully expect that it is, but I don't see it. But the churches are essential, and in the in the traditional good Christian book of Matthew way, they're helping each other, they're helping people, and they're talking about forgiveness, and they're talking about family support, and they're tithing and then providing clothing. And the churches are really, really important in these communities at the same time. And now, I keep on asking forgiveness, but forgive me again, because politically the churches aren't always all good. And I think we see it right now in this election. The evangelical communities kind of split. They've been backing Republicans, but look what's coming out of Trump's mouth. Am I supposed to back that? And it's complicated. But so the churches are playing it's certainly in the cities, this direct service role. That's really, really important. And then politically, as an institution, it's really complicated. We have all read the Catholic bishop's statement on crime. It came out 10 years ago by now. I blogged about it. Google me and Pope Francis. When Pope Francis came to DC, I blogged about the bishop's piece on crime, and it's very restorative. It's really good stuff. It's all the good stuff of religion, in that case Catholic, and the bishops made a statement that just talking about that's not punitive. It's not lock them up. It's all filled with forgiveness and policy recommendations. I don't know if you know that offhand. I'll have to email you later. You can Google on my webpage. You'll find a link to my blog post about it. But if you just start Googling Catholic bishops crime, that should get you there. And it was 10 years ago. But and in fact, I talked to people when that came out, and I said, so what are you doing about this? How are you operating politically? And I'm talking about elections and politics. And he said, Eric, the church measures time in the centuries. That book is out there. Eventually its time will come. And eventually it will make its way into our teachings and into our practice. And in the Francis era, that's happening more and more. So, yay, church.
Yes. Many churches. I know the Catholic Church Methodist Church, but I believe maybe Presbyterian Church. There's several denominations that have explicit stances for restorative justice. So it's really just exciting, even though it wasn't necessarily like restorative justice in the typical ways we think about it, but just in terms of meeting that need, that role of the church is there. And means, you know, the Methodist Church is doing a lot in relation to kind of a restorative approach to reentry. But Eric, we're getting close to time. So I just want to thank you once again for being here with us, and also asking you, remind us, how can people get a hold of Making Manna? And then are there any other closing comments that you'd like to share as we close?
No closing, well, only because we don't want to get away, as the churches, and a lot of them are taking stances against private prisons, and they're divesting from private prisons. So I want to give them credit for that before we get away. Thank you for having me. This was fun. The book is called Making Manna, and you can get it wherever you get it on Amazon. There's a Kindle edition. There's you get it from your local bookseller, or Amazon, wherever you'd like. Send me an email. There's a contact link on my webpage. I will be delighted to Skype into your book group wherever you are. And I hope you'll have a good time. So Making Manna, wherever you buy books, I'd like to think that you can buy that one. So no real closings. This was fun. Go restorative justice. We have to get there.
Yes.
We have to get there. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us to talk about your novel, Making Manna, as well as the potential that fiction has for promoting restorative justice and a justice that heals, which was our topic today. So thank you so much. And now we're going to have closing comments by Sarah Ting.
Thank you, Johonna. And thank you, Eric. That was a lovely conversation. I'll have to go and pick up your book. So I'm excited to read it. So my name is Sarah King, and I am a graduate student here at the Center for Justice and Peace Building in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I work as the graduate assistant for the Zehr Institute, and I have a couple of announcements to share with all of you that we'll go through here in the next few minutes. So we have one more webinar coming up for this fall series. It's Restorative Justice and the Practice of Law on December 6th. That should be in about a month, 4:30 again Eastern Standard Time. And Howard Zehr will be hosting that one. If you'd like to register, the link is there on the bottom of the screen. We would love to have everybody. And let me just see if this will, there we go. Okay, and then we have our Summer Peace Building Institute coming up. I know that sounds far away, but it's actually not. And SPI is a 4-week intensive during May and June, offering over 20 different courses. So if you're interested in taking an intensive course on restorative justice, there are 3 options here that are available. And there are also a plethora of others that you can take a look at as well. So the website is down at the bottom of the page if you'd like to attend SPI this summer. Next, we have STAR, which stands for Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, otherwise known as STAR. And it is a research-based training program that brings together theory and practice from neurobiology, conflict transformation, human security, spirituality, and restorative justice to address the needs of trauma-impacted individuals and communities. This program is great for individuals and organizations whose work brings them into contact with populations dealing with current or historic trauma. There are several opportunities to receive a STAR training. Currently, let's see here, actually, so the one at Hamline University it's happening now. If I have my date correct. And then we have some other STAR Level 1 trainings happening throughout the rest of the year, STAR 2, and then STAR for pre-K through 12 educators, which I believe is a brand new offering. So feel free to check those out. In terms of academics, we also have a RJ graduate certificate, which is 18 credit hours, and we have equal focus given to conflict analysis and practice, restorative justice studies, and then electives that you can focus on as you need for your own professional livings. The certificate can be completed through a number of courses offered through the annual Summer Peace Building Institute, as well as a combination of time on campus and summer class. We also have a restorative justice and education concentration that's now being offered in the Master's in Education program here at Eastern Manna University. And there's also a RJE graduate certificate, so 15-hour certificate for restorative justice and education. So 2 options there if you're interested in the intersection of restorative justice and education. And then we also have the Master's in Conflict Transformation here at the Center for Justice and Peace Building, and a brand new Master's in Restorative Justice. So those are both very fantastic programs. I might be biased, but I will say that. And so I think that's all I have for those, but please do feel free to check out any of those programs if they pique your interest. Last but not least, we have this lovely website as well, and we have all of our webinars. Past webinars are on that website as well as upcoming ones, so please feel free to check back. Like I said at the beginning, we will have a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel, which we will link through our website, so people can access it from a variety of points as they choose to. So on that note, I will conclude my announcements and hand it back over to Johonna for any closing remarks that she might have. So thank you. Johonna, you're muted.
Thank you, Sarah. So I just want to just thank our special guest, Eric Lotke, once again for joining us today. We don't take it lightly that you took the time to participate in our webinar, to share with us about your work. It was really an honor having you on today.
Thank you again for having me. This was fun.
And I also, it was fun for me too. And I also want to thank our participants. We had some who were not able to stay the entire time. Well, thank you not only to those, but also to those who were able to stay for the entire time on our webinar today. We appreciate your questions and your viewership. Our webinar will be online. This webinar will be online as a video soon. So if you know others who would enjoy watching it, feel free to check back on the Zehr Institute website in just a few days, and you can send them the link so others can benefit from the conversation that you benefited from today. Have a wonderful evening.